Are young people going to vote this year? Welcome to Future Hindsight, where we take big ideas in civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. Because democracy is not a spectator sport, tomorrow starts right now. I'm Mila Atmos. It's a midterm election year, and once again, we're wondering if young people will turn out at the ballot box. And further, how can we inspire civic action, starting with voting as a way of life? To answer these questions, we're joined by Raj Vinnakota. He is president of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, whose mission is to cultivate talent, ideas, and networks that develop young people as effective, lifelong citizens. He co-founded the Seed Foundation, creating America's first public college preparatory boarding schools for underserved children, and also previously served as executive vice president at the Aspen Institute, leading youth leadership initiatives. And before we start, if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's easy and free, and it really goes a long way. Check us out at youtube.com/futurehindsight. Welcome, Raj. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So every election cycle, we hear that young people are going to vote this year, but also young people never vote. So let's start there. You have worked with young people for decades now. I would love to hear your perspective on this.
I think that, unfortunately, that takes a very short-term perspective on the question, because the real perspective and question that everyone should be asking is whether or not young people in any generation are going to be engaged for the long term. And that looks different in different generations. What we're seeing right now is actually not disengagement, it's actually redefinition. Young people are realizing that the current democracy isn't working to solve significant problems that they see in front of them, and they are re-engaging. And probably the most hopeful news you can hear is not only do they want to re-engage, but they're recognizing that they need to do it in person. Yes, you can use social media and other forms of the phone, but what we really need to do is actually to get out, to talk, even talk with people with whom you don't agree, and start doing this work from the ground up.
Right. Well, I want to talk about that, but let's level set a little bit, because I mentioned in the intro that your mission at the Institute is to cultivate effective lifelong citizens. So here's a two-part question. What's an effective citizen? And then how do you do that work to foster this kind of citizenship?
So what we know is that to be able to develop a citizen requires a lot of things. It requires that you be civically knowledgeable, that you understand how your government works, that you understand how we are where we are today because of that and the politics around it, that you have the ability to discern the information that comes in front of you and separate fact from fiction from opinion, right? So there's a whole knowledge piece. Then there's a whole piece about productively engaging. Do you vote is one aspect of that, but it's also how do you engage in your community? And can you talk with people with whom you don't agree, what we call civil discourse? And then the third and final piece is, are you actually optimistic about the state of democracy in America? Do you have a sense of agency that you can make a difference? And do you then commit to engaging in some way or form? So that's such a broad definition, right? And so you have to decide where is it that you're actually going to really spend your time. And what we realized is that there are three places that really need a lot of time and investment. And they're, number one, teaching everyone, citizens, but especially young people, how to engage in thoughtful civil discourse. How do you productively engage with people even if you disagree with them? Secondly, how do you get young people to be able to discern and use credible information? Right? There's so much coming at all of us. There's so much coming at young people. How do you differentiate and know fact and opinion, fiction, not truth? And then the third thing is, how do you use all of that to actually develop a skill of collaborative problem solving? How do you work with people with whom you may not agree and actually do the work in your communities and in our country? Doing those things will get you more and more engaged in wanting to solve problems. It will get you more engaged in the politics and democracy and voting, but it also make you feel that, hey, you know what? I can make a difference. So it builds your sense of agency that says, yeah, I can do this and I can do this well.
Yeah, let's talk about the sense of agency because your organization just published the Gen Z Civic Vibe Check survey. And we obviously want to go over the findings, but before we do that, tell us a little bit about the methodology of the survey. Like, I want to know, how did you do the survey? What is the sample size? How did you reach your audience? What were the questions? And Zack here, the producer of Future Hindsight, is Gen Z, so we're all curious. Tell us more.
We called Zack 2,500 times. No. So we did a national survey. We were looking at 14 to 22-year-olds. And we asked them many questions. There was actually a fairly long set of questions that really started to get at how do you feel about your connections with people? How do you feel about engaging with others? What is stopping you from engaging in your community? What is your sense of what it means to be a citizen right now? All those kinds of questions. And it was a vibe check, right? So it was, a few thousands of people, but trying to get a sense of just like, where is the 14 to 22-year-old mind space right now?
So, well, tell us about the survey. What did it reveal about Gen Z, voting, democracy? Like, what's the big picture takeaway?
So I think that there's three major takeaways that everyone should hear. One is I alluded to already. They actually prefer in-person engagement. So I want to say that again. They actually prefer in-person engagement.
You mean they don't want TikTok?
Well, they're all digital natives, right? They might like TikTok, but 77% of them say they're more likely to get involved and have the kind of difficult and productive conversations in person, not online. The second thing is, even within that 14 to 24 age group, you need to separate them down a little bit because their age differs. So if you look at 14 to 18-year-olds, their motivation about what's happening, this was in late 2025, that vibe check itself, right? But they're driven by social connection with other young people, by their rights feeling threatened, and they want to build their skills. If you go to the 19 to 22-year-olds, right, they're more motivated by economic pressures, worried about abuses of power, barriers to opportunity, and moments when they see leadership actually failing them. So you have different motivations for wanting to engage. Here's the most hopeful thing about it, though. Barriers, not apathy, is what's holding them back. 9 out of 10 of them are saying they care about their communities and feel a responsibility to engage. So what's holding them back? 42% of them said they would get more involved if they simply knew where to begin or had clear pathways to do that. So there's your lever, right? Half of them are saying, I just need to find a path. I need to find ways to do it. And one of the things that we're doing is also elevating stories of young people who are engaging in their communities. So you can see, hey, wait, I can be just like that person. I can engage because I want to engage. I want to solve the problems in my community.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you that I had dinner last night with 2 women who are not Gen Z. Okay, so one of them I think is in her 60s, and the other one I'm going to say she is in her late 70s. And they both complained that they felt powerless and they didn't know what to do. And you are now doing this work showing young people that they have agency. What is the work that you do to tell them, here's where you start, this is what you do?
I think this notion that you're feeling a lack of agency is not just a youth thing right now. Part of it is that there's just so much going on. Right here we are in late January, and I can talk about just the last 3 weeks, right, of what's been happening in the world. The Middle East and Iran, and South America and Venezuela, and Minnesota and Greenland, and it can be overwhelming. And one of the things that we really push is to say, start in your own community. Start with identifying things that you want to work on that need change, so that you can actually see how your investment drives and starts to make an impact. One of the things that we do, and I'll just use the Carnegie Young Leaders Program, where we've selected over 500 fellows last year. We're about to go out to select more fellows this year. And we're trying to select young people who've identified specific problems in their community that requires working with people with whom they don't necessarily agree, right? And so giving you the skills to do that, but they've identified a problem that they and their colleagues, their peers, want to work on. And by doing that, what we're trying to show is you're not going to solve climate change immediately. You're not going to solve the problems of the federal government, the challenges that you see immediately. But what you can do is solve a specific problem you may see in your community, in your region, in your state, if you bring the right people together. And we help develop the skills and get you to understand there's many other young people who are trying to do similar things. So that part of the work is really from the ground up and trying to activate as many young people to take on these actions.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Well, we just had a conversation about civic education across K through 12. And this conversation feels like a great follow-up because you work with a lot of college students. And I was super heartened to discover that you spearheaded investment in civic preparedness at the college level. So tell us a little bit about how the College Presidents for Civic Preparedness Coalition came about, and what has been your favorite part of that effort that you're like, yes, this is exactly what I had in mind?
So this work, the College Presidents for Civic Preparedness, started in late 2020. I started reaching out to presidents and asking them a very simple question. I said, what do you do to civically prepare your students? And I, on purpose, chose a broad array of presidents to talk to about this. So I'll give you some names just as a sense of this, right? So Michael Roth at Wesleyan, Jonathan Holloway at Rutgers, Mitch Daniels, who was then the president at Purdue, Hiram Chodosh, the president at Claremont McKenna College, Wayne Fredericks at Howard University, and on and on. There was a large group of presidents. And it was interesting because they would give me very specific answers about what they were doing on campus, right? And it would be different because they were different schools. But there were two themes that were consistent across all of their answers. The first, they said that higher education's pendulum had swung too far to being viewed largely as a private good. Higher education, colleges and universities have a public good responsibilities. Prepare students to be citizens, be bulwarks for our democracy, think about your role in the community. But frankly, more and more and more, they were focusing largely on career development, jobs for their graduates. And that is a very important responsibility, but it is not the only responsibility of colleges and universities. They also have this public good responsibility. And every president kept telling us, we've lost our way there. We need to make it more of a priority and more of an emphasis. That was the first theme. The second theme, which was related but separate, is our college president said when they wanted to take bold approaches in this area, that the pushback from stakeholders made it nearly impossible to sustain the work. Now, those stakeholders will be different in different circumstances. So they could be boards, donors, alumni. They could be students, faculty, administrators. They could be community leaders, policymakers, legislators, parents. They really pushed back so hard that presidents couldn't sustain the work over a long period of time. So we kept hearing this over and over again. And finally we said, wait. Is there value in creating a coalition of the willing? What if we took this collective power of presidents and had them work together? Supported them in their efforts, what were best practices, creating more of a movement around this. And 11 of the presidents raised their hands and said, that would be interesting. Let's have conversations around it. And so first virtually during the pandemic, and then after the pandemic in person, we started to meet with these presidents to say, how can we do this work? And in August of 2023, we publicly announced with 14 presidents, College Presidents for Civic Preparedness. And that was August. A few other presidents joined us. Then October 7th happened. And many, many presidents started saying, hey, look, I had underestimated how important it is for us to teach civil discourse and collaborative problem solving for our students. We'd like to join your efforts. And we literally grew from that 14 in 2023 to 77 in 2024 to 95 last year. We're now at 130 college presidents across the country, 37 states and the District of Columbia,
Wow.
Everything from large public institutions like the University of Wisconsin and Rutgers and Pitt and the University of North Texas to regional state institutions like James Madison University and Montclair State to elite liberal arts colleges all over the country, historically Black colleges and universities. And over the last year and a half, we've also had community college presidents and system presidents join us. So it's become a really large group of presidents and chancellors who have said, this is something we need to make a priority for our institution. And we'd like to work together to learn how to do this and drive the culture change that's required so that all of our students can graduate understanding how to engage in productive conversation, being able to use credible information, learning how to collaboratively problem solve, understand that you're going to work with people with whom you may not agree, but this is what it means to be in a democracy. This is what it means to all be in this boat together. You have to work together to solve problems. And that's the skills we're going to teach you.
So how does this work look? Is that a class that is required, or are you training the professors, all of the instructors to communicate a certain way? Like, how can you generalize this across the whole population? And does it look the same, more or less, in all of these universities?
So really astute question, because you're absolutely right. It doesn't look the same at the University of Wisconsin versus Howard University versus Wesleyan versus Claremont McKenna College. So we realize a couple things. Number one is it requires a multifaceted approach, because if you're going to change campus culture, if you're going to try to touch every single student on your campus, then you need to use orientation, you need to use general education, you need to use residential programming where students reside on campuses. You need to use co-curricular approaches, extracurricular approaches. So it needs to be multi-dimensional, and there's different ways of doing it. The second thing is, because each school is unique, what we do is we bring connections, mechanisms to do this, best practice. We bring professional development for faculty who want to learn how to bring contentious issues in the classroom. And we identify other organizations that are doing specific work really well. And then the third thing, which we can't forget, is we also engage in measurement, because we can't know whether or not we're actually making progress if we're not willing to measure it. And I know you and I were just talking about this before this, but I'm a scientist, right? I'm a molecular biologist by training. And so for me, one of the first questions in any kind of major problem is, how do we know whether or not we're actually making progress? How are we measuring? And so these presidents who are working with us, who are doing this deep work, are committing to work with us to measure whether or not there's actually change, both at the intervention level and at the campus climate survey, so that we know whether or not there's progress being made, and we can start to discern, right? We won't know exactly, but okay, schools that are doing X seem to be having a greater impact than schools that are doing Y. What can we understand from that? How do we tell all of our cohorts? How do we tell all colleges and universities so that they can learn from this?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is perfect, because this is my follow-up question, of course. Like, what is the impact of this work, right? And I'm really specifically curious about how students are thinking and talking about democracy writ large, or civic engagement beyond voting, let's call it, after your intervention. Like, what have you found in terms of the temperature?
So we're very early in the process to really understand what's going on our campuses, right? So we just started doing baseline evaluation this year, and we're starting to get an understanding of where our schools are in terms of collaborative problem solving and comfort with speaking up, comfort with engaging with people with whom you may disagree, comfort with trying to do problem solving with people with whom you may disagree. All of that, the baseline's going in fall and upcoming spring surveys. So we're going to learn a lot over the next few months in terms of what's going on. Then we'll know whether or not we're making progress over the upcoming few next years as we're doing this work. To me, knowing whether or not a campus is doing well is partly this measurement that I'm just sharing with you now, but it's partly also understanding if both adults and students on campus are saying, I'm actually being able to engage in difficult conversations to try to get to a better understanding of the truth, right? Are you having the kinds of debates in the classroom? Are you having the kinds of debates debates, but also in other parts, in other curricular activities and so on? I'll give you two really interesting things I'll be looking for. One is we just learned from one of our schools that as they're starting to implement this, that the number of difficult conversations between roommates and requests for roommate transfers has been going down. What an interesting indicator, right? If you learn these skills that, actually you learn how to live with whoever your roommate is, whatever their foibles. The other thing is, one of the interesting crucibles that our presidents tell us where they're interested in seeing this is on sports teams. Because, wow, you want to talk about a place where you want to make sure that all of your athletes are actually able to engage in this, right? In tense situations, you may disagree, but guess what? You're all on the same team together. You're actually going to have to figure out whether you do this right and do this well. So there's a few of our presidents who are using sports teams as a test case, as a pilot, to see whether or not some of these trainings could actually work well.
Interesting. We'll be back with Raj in just a moment, so stick around. You'll want to tune in to this episode's Civic Spark. One small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, it's time for some life talk. Life insurance talk, that is. You probably have it, but do you know how much you're paying for it? And for how much are you being covered? Odds are you paid too much for too little. And here's a scary fact. If you receive life insurance through your job and you're unexpectedly laid off, you could suddenly be covered for nothing. It's scary to think about, but simple to get right. Thanks to SelectQuote, where so many are headed to sort out their life insurance policy today. I'd like to thank SelectQuote for supporting Future Hindsight. For over 40 years, SelectQuote has been one of the most trusted brokers in insurance, helping more than 2 million Americans secure over $700 billion in coverage. Their mission is simple: to find you the right insurance policy for your unique needs. They shop, you save. Unlike other one-size-fits-all insurance companies, SelectQuote's licensed agents work for you for free, comparing policies from top-rated carriers and finding your best fit in as little as 15 minutes. Head to selectquote.com/hopeful and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. No medical exam? No problem. They partner with providers offering same-day coverage up to $2 million without needing to visit your doctor. Have high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease? SelectQuote has partners with policies designed for many pre-existing health conditions, so you get the protection you deserve. Life insurance is never cheaper than it is today. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at selectquote.com/hopeful. Save more than 50% on term life insurance at selectquote.com/hopeful today to get started. That's selectquote.com/hopeful. And now let's return to my conversation with Raj Vinnakota. Well, I just want to put this in here as a side note. We had recently a conversation that one of the strongest indicators of whether you vote or not is if your roommate votes or not. So if your roommate is a voter, you are likely also to be a voter. And that leads me to my next question about voting behavior. We have learned on the podcast that voting is tautological, meaning voters vote and non-voters don't vote, right?
That's right.
And so the perennial question is, how can we get young people to identify as voters? Because we know that once they do, they're going to vote for the rest of their lives. So how does this idea inform your work to bring about sustained civic engagement, sustained turnout among young people?
So in order for young people to really want to vote, they're going to need to know that they can make a difference in the direction of this country. And frankly, more than 50% of young people don't affiliate with either political party. So one part of this, as I just said, is getting them to engage so that they can see, hey, if I actually work in my community, if I can vote for people in my community and start to see change, I'm more likely to be willing to say, hey, my vote counts. And then the other part of it, frankly, is being able to get the whole system to figure out how it is that it doesn't simply define itself as Democrats and Republicans, right? That notion of affective polarization has driven so much of the split that exists, right? Kind of this tribalism that we're seeing as how you define yourself. And young people don't want to be part of either one of those tribes because they don't see either one of them solving the problems that they see as being existential. So part of it is how do we motivate them to engage? But part of it is also, can we show a path that isn't stuck in one political party versus the other?
Yeah. Well, so you just said existential problems. What are the existential problems to young people? Because I think that's different for people who are 80 and people who are 22.
When Gen Z talks about it, they talk about it on at least 3 levels, right? One is just literally climate change, the country I'm living in, what does it look like? What is it going to be? The second is economic. Like, is this a country that still will have jobs for me? Where is it going? Will I be able to have a middle class existence or better? And so on. And the third is technological. AI and where is it taking this world? What does it mean for me? And all 3 of those questions, and there's many others, but those 3 big buckets is what's on their mind when they talk and are concerned about seeing our political ecosystem and whether or not they're actually tackling these issues.
So how do you connect those 2 dots? How do you connect the dots of solving one of those existential problems with their in-community civic engagement?
It has to be first on an individual level, seeing that you can make a difference, and then creating a movement and being able to look to your left and your right and seeing other people your age doing the same. It's actually the reason why I'm so excited about this year and the 250th anniversary, because I think it's a moment in time where you can say, look, it's time to redefine what our democracy is for you and how you engage in it. You can't be passive. And as I said earlier in my survey, 90% of Gen Z wants to engage, right? They're just looking for the path and the support to be able to get there. And so planting the flag that says, here's a whole set of young people who are doing work in their communities. You can do the same. It's time for you to step up as well. And if we all step up, you actually can then start a movement that changes how politics works at the local level, certainly, but then at the state level and at the federal level. It's about empowering young people to step up and say, yes, you know what? We want to take more ownership for where things go and not being passive.
Well, so I have a question about harnessing the work that you're doing and applying it to the broader population. And I know that you're in the beginning in some ways, and you haven't been able to really, you're still level setting and you're still trying to understand what is the baseline for young people. But you have been working with young people for a long time. So what are the lessons that we can take from colleges successfully fostering civil discourse in order to reduce polarization in our communities in general? Generalizing what you've learned from working. I mean, you're working with people, whether they're young or old. I think human nature is essentially the same.
So let me tell you what our working hypothesis is for how we change campus culture.
Okay.
And then let's have a conversation about how to apply that to the rest of the country and the world. So the hypothesis says that you have to work on skills development, right? That's what we've been talking about during this podcast, and how you develop these skills both in the classroom, in the dormitories, in your extracurriculars, and so on. So that's one of the 3 things you need to do. Unfortunately, we as a society tend to over-index on that one and forget that there's 2 other things we also need to spend our time on. The second item is that you need to create the motivation for young people to want to learn and develop and practice these skills. So in our case, where we spend a lot of our time when it comes to creating the motivation is that we share with young people that employers are really interested in these skills. That is, if you know how to work across difference and solve problems and to be able to engage with people who may disagree with you, that there's a greater chance that you'll get hired. There's a greater chance you'll get retained. there's a greater chance you'll get promoted. And we have that data out there from a number of surveys that's one of the major things that employers are looking for in the people that they're hiring, especially as they're looking out to Gen Z. So hopefully that creates part of the motivation to say, okay, like I'm not just doing the skills development for the sake of it. I'm also doing it because it'll help me get a job and hopefully build my career. So motivation is the second of three things. You then have a third piece, which is social permission. Even if you know the skills, even if you're motivated to learn them, in the moment when this comes up, where you're challenged to do it, do you feel that you have the social permission to do it? And that societal permission doesn't come from someone my age telling a young person on a college campus they can do it. It comes from their peers. So a lot of our work is also focused around how do you get athletes, heads of fraternities and sororities, heads of student government, head of the large clubs and programs and so on, to role model these skills on campus and say, this is the way in which you want to act. When someone acts poorly towards you, you actually want to talk to them with a form of empathy and curiosity and learning more rather than just yelling back at them. And you want peers to be creating the culture on campus that says, this is the right way to act. Because that then creates the permission for other people, young people, to do the same thing. So as I said, it's not just skills development. You also need to create the motivation and you need to create the social permission to do it. That's our hypothesis for how we get campuses to change what they do. Okay, so now let's take what you've said and let's try to apply it to other places. And, one obvious place is the political environment.
Yes,
and
unfortunately, it gives you permission to be cruel in this moment.
Well, exactly, right? Unfortunately, right now, at least the theory here is when you look at it is the permission structure and the motivation is exactly on its head, right?
Yes.
The motivation is more clickbait. And that's how you raise more money. And that's how you get more notoriety. And that's how you're more likely to make a difference. So now trying to figure out how we apply this is not only do I have to build these skills and all of these people, and you can define them at whichever way you want to, but you also need to create the environment for this to be true in different places. Now, I'm going to give you a specific example of a peer in an organization that I just think the world of, which is Future Caucus. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they work with young legislators, who come from different political parties and yet are trying to solve problems. And in some small micro way, what they're doing is this, right? They've got people who have the skills, but they're creating the motivation to work together to actually solve problems. And in their world, they're trying to create the peer permission, the social permission that this is the right way to act because it's in our best interest. I'd love to see that continue and the flywheel to move and more people to see that kind of work the same way that we're doing on college campuses. I hope the same way that it'll happen in high schools and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think the most heartening thing is that I've had a number of these conversations, including with you, that there are so many people who are motivated by this, that they really want to make this happen, that we foster civil discourse in a way that maybe we have never done before, where people are really actively seeking ways to do this, in a robust manner going forward. So every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guest to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. What's a good way to turn the insights that you've just shared with us into action?
Well, it's interesting because it's actually one of the things we're working on. And probably in the next month or so, we'll start to talk about how we want everyone to engage in civic action in their communities. What I'm just talking about and what I've been sharing with you is not hard. We all see specific challenges in our communities that we'd love to engage on. And frankly, a lot of them requires our time, going to mentor, going to volunteer, going to work in our communities in some way or form to role model what it means to be civically engaged. There's a tendency to especially focus around elections, and I get why you do that. They have an outsized impact. But The real development of the muscle of civic engagement doesn't happen every 2 or 4 years. It happens every week and every month. And the more that we role model that for others, be they younger people, older people, peers, and spend a little time doing that, you'll find that you'll have an impact on the people around you. The second thing I would say, because I'm just going to take advantage of having a second spark here, is that you also want to role model what it means to work across difference. That when there is someone who says something that really sets you off, right? Your blood boils, your adrenaline's going through the roof and so on, that your first reaction should be, that's interesting. Why do you believe that? And really think about curiously why that person might have come to that position and try to understand and empathize with their perspective. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to win a debate. You don't have to seek closure. But the simple act of recognizing the humanity of that other person and engaging and trying to understand why it is they came to that position, no matter how much you disagree with, starts to set the base for how it is we're going to try to work together and solve our problems. Without doing that, without respecting and understanding the humanity of everyone involved, we're not going to be able to get anywhere.
Hear, hear. Well, looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
I don't even have to look in the future. That's what gets me excited about this. We have 500 fellows who are working across the country who are actually trying to solve problems in their communities. And the interesting thing about it is they have very different ways of manifesting that. I'll just give you a couple of examples. There's a group of young people on the West Coast who happen to be in a hospital on an election day and suddenly said, wait a second, how are all these people going to be able to vote? And so they have a program that they're starting up to figure out how it is that people who are in hospitals actually have the right to be able to actually vote. Because many of them end up in the hospital the day before or that day, right? You don't have an absentee ballot or so on. And so they're trying to start a little movement out there. We have other young people who are trying to figure out how it is that you, of all things, believe it or not, create biodegradable glitter. Because glitter is going into all the rivers in Alaska and causing all kinds of problems. So you have a young group of people who are trying to figure out how you change a very simple thing so that it has a different, in that case, both economic and climate impact on their community. And, if you go to our website, citizensandscholars.org, you'll see all kinds of examples of young people who are actually doing the work and incredibly energizing.
That's amazing. Although I have to say, sometimes when I hear initiatives like glitter or plastic, I'm like, well, we should just stop using that. That might be an easier solution.
These are not mutually exclusive, right?
They're not.
Exactly.
They're not.
So,
You're right.
yeah.
You're right. Well, Raj, thank you so much for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm really impressed by the work that you do at Citizens and Scholars.
Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here.
Raj Vinnakota is president of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, where he cultivates talent, ideas, and networks for lifelong civic engagement. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. Volunteer, mentor, find a way to be involved in your community as a civically engaged person. Show everyone around you what that looks like and be a model for good civil discourse. Engaging and organizing isn't an every 2 to 4 year process. It's daily. Next week on Future Hindsight, we'll be joined by Julia Spiegel. She's the founder and CEO of GovAct, a centralized platform for collaboration across governors' offices, incubating, launching, and supporting alliances of governors. That's next time on Future Hindsight. Now, be sure to follow us on your podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. And if you're listening on your browser, you can find Future Hindsight on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. We're here to build your civic action toolkit every week. So follow Future Hindsight now and we'll come right to you. And if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent pro-democracy podcast, consider subscribing to the Civics Club on Patreon. head to patreon.com/futurehindsight now to join. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zack, Travis, and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.